The Institute for Faith and Freedom at Grove City College presents Liberty Mail with the Student Fellows of Faith and Freedom.
Welcome back to Liberty Mail. I'm Katie Kenline.
And I'm Ashby Abernathy.
And today we have the great privilege of welcoming the president of Focus on the Family, Jim Daly, into our studio at Grove City College. You're speaking with Dr. Trueman tonight, right?
We're taping a program for Focus on the Family, actually,
Yes.
with Dr. Trueman.
Well, it's really exciting to have you. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, it's great. This is so much fun. I love a college campus.
Yes.
Yeah, it's good. A lot of electricity, right?
Yes.
A lot of energy.
Absolutely.
Finals the week before finals,
Is it the
too.
week before finals?
We're on the
Timing
grind.
is everything.
Yes.
You guys are going, can I just go study?
No, it's great. We're glad to be here.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Good. It's good to be with you.
Yep. So many of our listeners will be familiar with the work Focus on the Family. And many of us, myself included, grew up listening to Adventures in Odyssey, hearing it on the
Yes.
radio.
Everybody loves that one.
But in particular case, to any of our listeners who don't know about your work, what all encompasses the work of Focus on the Family?
Yeah, that's, when I got into the role in 2005, I was already there for 16 years. So I
Okay,
started
wow.
at Focus on the Family in 1989. So when I got there, I worked in marketing, worked all over the organization. So I kind of had a good idea how we can maybe tighten up the organization a little bit.
Yeah.
So we started concentrating on core things like marriage, obviously, parenting, life. We have a big outreach for pro-life and through ultrasound machines and other things. And then evangelism kind of at the core. Dr. Dobson used to say, if we save a family but don't introduce that family to the creator of the family, we kind of miss the mark.
Wow.
So we've held true to that perspective. And then finally, how do we engage culture? And those are the 5 core areas that we're involved with. And we throw about $150 million a year at that effort.
No, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things right now in our nation is the name Focus on the Family really stands out and speaks volumes. But I know you've shared some of your testimony online in certain publications, and you come from a broken home. I also come from that. I know
Right.
the statistics show that 40 to 50% of marriages end in divorce. I think there's more child abuse than we'd like to admit in our country. Where do you think we're at in this cultural moment? The idea of Focus on the Family. Where do you think we're
Yeah.
at? Do you have hope? Where do you see us?
I do. I think the pendulum is sweeping back. And the reason I see that, I think divorce rates are down considerably. I think people that are getting married, kind of your age group, when you marry, you're staying married compared to the previous generation. So I think there is hope. I think those basic truths, those fundamental principles are coming back into vogue, you might say. Spiritually, it's a great thing. But I do think people are realizing kind of the last 60 years, I would say, was an experiment toward confusion and toward a lot of disunity. And I think we're coming around. I think our senses, I think both within the church and outside the church, frankly, I think in part the election was somewhat in that direction. It was bigger than the person, in my opinion. So I am pretty bullish on where the data is at. You're at a university. I have a great relationship with Dr. Brad Wilcox, social scientist. He and others, I'm trying to think, I interviewed a woman from from MIT. She also is an economist, not a believer, but she was brave enough to talk about the two-parent privilege.
Wow.
And wrote the book to that title. And she's saying just all the data supports the fact that children do best in a two-parent loving home. And that's what we've been screaming from the rooftops
Yes.
since 1977.
Wow.
It's just kind of fun to see the academic community coming around saying, oh, guess what? They were right.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And shifting off of that, so this is kind of more towards the pro-life movement. With shifting laws and policies on abortion, we're living in a post-Roe America now. What new challenges or opportunities do you see for the pro-life movement?
I think there's several. Obviously, what I was suggesting to the country through my radio program was this will get more complicated, not less complicated, and I think that's true. We did defeat Roe versus Wade, but it put it back into 50 battlefields. And so all the states have been going at it. Thankfully, we were able to support the Florida fight against Amendment 4. We beat that by just over 3%, which is unfortunate, but it was that thin. But, I think generally those states that are selecting a more radical abortion protocol, like right up until birth, that should be where we're concentrating. And those more conservative states, if you want to look at it experimentally, those more conservative states that are preserving life, I think we've had an estimated 120,000 babies saved. And these are lives. That's what people don't understand. It's not a political battle. I mean, what we're trying to say is that that baby in the womb is a human being and deserves dignity and a chance. And so, our big motto is there is a choice in this country, but the better choice is life. And it's so true, again, from all the data, not just spiritually, which we know will be true, but the data supports that. Women and men who are involved in abortion tend not to do well emotionally, spiritually, et cetera, with that situation. And so how do we provide a better way to go, with adoption and other options, supporting a woman in distress if she's without any husband or boyfriend to help her? How do we give her some leg up?
Well, and some of your work, will you tell us about the ultrasound charts? And you also have there's a foster initiative too, is that, or kind of adopted?
There is. So the ultrasound machine placement, we started, 20 years ago. I think we were the first to do that. Then Knights of Columbus came in, and Storks and other groups now support it. And it's such a big effort. It needs a lot of organizational buttressing. But for us, ultrasound, so we've placed, I don't even know the number of machines, hundreds of machines in clinics around the country. Our estimate is about 515,000 babies that we've been able to save through that effort. Wow. And that includes grants to clinics around the country to help professionalize those services and bring them up so that they can be more effective in their communities. But they're the frontline workers. We always get so excited. But even now with pill reversal options, we're concentrating on that. And most people don't realize that, a young woman takes that first abortion pill, she has about 72 hours to get a reversal pill. And it works. It's not unsafe for the baby. And I think we've had 5,000 babies saved through that effort as well. So we're excited. We'd love to change the attitude fundamentally about the worth of a human being. That's the core work. Yes. And we have to do that one step at a time. I would just encourage Christians not to give up. We're joyful people. Don't be overwhelmed by what the culture says or wants to do. These are human beings made in God's image. And let's make sure people understand they are too, even if they oppose us. Yes. So that's good. And then secondly, the foster effort really came out of my foster experience because I was a foster kid. And, I just felt like we could do more. You start looking at the numbers, and I was always so discouraged because there's about 100,000 kids in the foster system that don't have parents. The courts have separated them legally from their parents. So they're just in the system. And we have about 360,000 churches in the country. So that's just one kid for every 3 churches, If we could just, as a community of believers, adopt those kids. They're not easy. Some of them may be unadoptable, I get that, but not as many as people would think. But there's many kids that just need a home, and especially if a church community can surround that adoptive family and help them, the chances of success for that family and for that child are sky high. But we as Christians need to be engaged.
Well, I think that's what you said earlier also about the opposition understanding their value and worth. I saw that I went to public school in Washington State where many of my peers that I saw posting all kinds of things about being, my body, my choice, I could almost see this fundamental, they didn't see their, they were depressed or suicidal, had no understanding of their own worth. And so, of course, they wouldn't see that a child was worth anything.
I'm amazed at how effective the abortion industry has been at separating a woman from that natural, God-given instinct to protect and be there for that child. I mean, it's a phenomenal, dark but phenomenal success that they've been able to achieve to allow a woman to turn on her child, which to me is just, that's so amazing. But they had to dehumanize that child to get that going. It's a blob of tissue. It really isn't human. And now we know, 8 weeks, 7 weeks, the heartbeat's going. That baby's turning into a fully formed child in just weeks.
Yeah.
So, it's, now we get down to where do you want to draw the line? And for focus, it's conception, because we just believe that's where the culture should be to protect innocent human life. And then even with what I'm talking about with Dr. Carl Trueman, one of your professors tonight, it's just that linkage between how we dehumanize the baby in the womb all the way down to how we dehumanize one another, and critical theory and how it begins to shake down the human race and divide us by immutable attributes. So we can rise above those things, I believe.
I wonder if this also connects, something that we've talked about some is the destruction of the foundation of the family in our culture, or the foundation of marriage. And you say that's a lot of the work that you do. What do you think, what are some of the cultural notions about marriage, or the traditional family with a father and a mother that you're coming in contact with all the time?
I think there's such a swirl. It's like a sea of these gigantic waves that have just been pounding all of us for the last 60 years or so, trying to redefine what's important within the family unit, etc. But here's the truth. Men and women are different. We get married. God has created this way. We get married, and the biggest thing, I think, especially for young Christians today, young meaning 20-something Christians, is the value that marriage, the institution that God created, brings to us, which is to, in my opinion, make us more like Christ. And how do you do that? I know that in my own marriage, I have selfish instincts. It's my flesh. And so why does marriage help me become more like Christ, to become more selfless? And I learned that in my marriage, mostly. And then you have kids, and they take off the other edges. But you have to have that attitude is, why did God create it this way? What is he wanting to achieve in my marriage? And I think that's it, to become more like him. That's laying your life down for one another. And it's hard. It's hard for Christians, let alone the world that doesn't subscribe to our Christian worldview. So, I think that's the key. I think when you look at it in that way, it allows you to argue differently with your spouse. And I think that's a good thing.
No, and you have...
Yeah, absolutely. And then just going off that, so we've been seeing a lot more with modern families struggling with just staying committed to their faith and just keeping the faith just in a culture like what we live in now. What's the best way that they can learn to stay committed with that and overcome the problems with that?
I think two things that come to my mind. One is know the Word. I mean, if you don't have a photographic memory, if you didn't go to Grove City College, your SAT was a little low, you could still read the Word, right, and know the Word. And I think that's so critical, because that is what allows that self-reflection to occur. That's what allows you to know that you're being selfish in this moment, is you kind of compare your actions against the Word of God. And so knowing the Word of God in that way intimately, these aren't just poetic prose. These are things that we're supposed to digest emotionally, intellectually, and put into play. And then live it as best as we can. And when we don't live it well, be mature enough to apologize to the people that we're offending. I have friends, especially secular business people, that'll say to me, you know what, I don't like dealing with Christians because they're all hypocrites. I said, oh, you're absolutely right. We are hypocrites because we're not perfect, but we are trying to walk more and more perfectly every day with Christ. But we are hypocrites because we can't live it perfectly. That's why we need Jesus. And they'll go, oh, never thought of it that way, which is so true. I mean, I'm not Jesus, so don't look at me and think, oh, that must be Jesus. No, far from it, but trying.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then moving off that, so we've also been seeing a push for school choice happening across the country. How should parents be approaching the decision about private school, public school, or homeschooling from a faith perspective?
We just taped a program with Cynthia Tobias. The Way We Learn was her big book years ago, and she's rewritten it now, updated it. And we were talking about this concept for Christian families particularly, to really scrutinize what kind of educational system you want to put your kids in. And we're both in the camp that if we had our kids today, I mean, I do have kids, but they're in their 20s, they're in college. And but if I had to put them in kindergarten again, I would probably look strongly at homeschooling, just because of the bad influence that is occurring right now that's so beyond, arithmetic and reading. And it's an influence. It's a way to win your kids over to things that'll be very detrimental, I think, long term. I was at an event, and this is when the trans lap dance stuff was out and being talked about up in Virginia and Loudoun County, and the parents were really upset about it. And a father stepped up in this event I was at and said, "Where are the dads? Where are the dads standing out in the school parking lot saying you're not going to molest our children any longer, or we're going to tear every plank of the school down?" You might say, well, that's toxic masculinity, but we need some expression both from mom, who's always there, right? She's always at PTA. But I would encourage dads to say, stand up for your kids and your kids' friends, because it's a brutal environment in the education system spiritually. And I think you're beginning to see that pendulum swing as well, where families are beginning to stand up and say, okay, this is enough. We're not going down this path anymore. And to the point where even those that subscribe to the LGBTQ groups, they're now reassessing their tactics to say we may need to tone down what we are doing. And I would say that's a very wise decision.
It's a fascinating conversation we have at school.
Yeah,
for
I'm sure
many
you
of
do.
us who've been in public school and thinking about what we want to do with our children, and to think, public school made me who I am today, but would I do it again? I don't know.
Well, it's if you have a choice.
Yes.
Homeschooling, I think, is more about the parents than the child. You
That's
have
true.
to have a certain amount of discipline, a certain, not ability. I mean, you need some ability, obviously, but you don't have to expect a lot of yourself in that way. But it does require a daily kind of discipline to get that done. One thing I'd mention, I was at a meeting with LGBTQ leaders in Washington, D.C., along with Tim Keller, the late Tim Keller, the great Tim Keller. I mean, that guy was such a deep thinker. And we're sitting in an upper room. It sounds kind of odd at this restaurant. And there were 5 evangelicals and 5 LGBTQ leaders. And Tim, at the very end, Gabe Lyons was there, and Gabe said, let's give each other permission just to share advice for the other side, if you guys are all willing. And we all said, oh, yeah, let's do that. And Tim Keller, of course, landed the kaboom. And he said something I'll never forget. He said, the reason New York City works is because we don't go out of our way to stick our finger in the other person's eye. So the Muslims don't go to the Christians to ask for things to be done that can't be done according to their faith, and vice versa. And he said the city works that way because we respect each other's faiths and traditions. And he said, if I could say it to you at the table, the LGBTQ leaders, you should take a lesson from that. Be careful if you're going to go out of your way to stick your finger in the other person's eye, because that will come back on you. Wow. And I think we're beginning to see that now. Not in a mean-spirited way, but people only get pushed so far, and then there's going to be a response. And I think that movement has hit the wall.
Oh, that's really fascinating. Well, I guess this might go back to marriage earlier, what we were talking about, but what advice, just as we look at these issues, many of us as college students are not, we're not exactly looking at having children next year, but first.
But will you? Will you?
No, I have, the thing here is ring by spring. I have many friends who are, getting married as soon as we graduate in the spring.
Yeah.
But first and foremost, what advice do you have for young people as they're just looking at the culture? Putting your child in schooling might be down the road, but marriage, dating, what advice do you have in the meantime?
Well, going back to Dr. Brad Wilcox, he just wrote that book that I interviewed him on, Get Married, because all the data supports that. You want to be stable emotionally, mentally, financially, get married, because the data supports that. You will do better as an individual, as a couple, as a family, if you're committed to your marriage. And I think that's wonderful. And then the next thing is, man, just hang on. I love it. Being a parent has been the highlight of my life, being a dad to my 2 boys. And the biggest smile I ever saw on their faces one time, because we started a little late. My wife was not in a good situation. She came from a pretty abusive home and just didn't feel like she would be a good enough mom. So she had to battle that. So we had our 2 kids later. And when I told my boys, you know what, I just wish I would have had more of you. And they had the biggest smile on their face. And Trent, my oldest, goes, really? Like he couldn't believe it. I was going, this has been the highlight of my life to be a dad to you guys. And I just think, look forward to it, embrace it. Don't worry about the Walmart meltdown. It's going to happen. It's just what kids do. and but just enjoy it and love each other. I mean, it's not complicated. It's actually quite simple. It just takes a bit of loving discipline to hang in together.
Well, and that might be contrary to some of the messages that I don't know if we see necessarily in social media or through celebrities, the idea that children are a burden and that as young people we should look to establish our career first, that we should just that children are a burden. It's something I think I see many of my peers and we struggle with that because we have an understanding that God created us to raise up the next generation.
You know what I've noticed? The older you get, you'll realize this, and I'm 63. What's most important? You know, I'm stepping out in the next few years. I'll step out of this role of focus if I don't get hit by a truck and the Lord take me sooner. But the point is, when I look back on it all, I've met 4 or 5 presidents, many senators, presidents and parliament members from overseas. All really fun, enjoyable, interesting people. Nowhere close to my family, my sons and my wife. And I just think as you get older, you get a deeper appreciation. And if I could have had that understanding, even back when I was 25, when I married Jean, it would have evened out some of the rocky places in our marriage because I would have been more willing to give and to love her in a different way as a young man. And when you get older, you realize this is what it's all about. And it's unfortunate we don't understand that quite as clearly when we're building our career and doing all the things that we got to get our bank account in order, all that. But, you know, part of the fight of it, the struggle of it is what makes life life. I was just talking to my security guy who was driving me over. Brian, he was saying when they went on their honeymoon, they ran out of cash and they didn't have credit cards. And they're in Hawaii, and they owed a restaurant some big money for dinner, and she had paid the bills, and they had a debit card but no money in the bank. And he's laughing about it. Now, I'm sure he was not laughing then.
Oh, no.
And they had to write a check, and the restaurant had to trust him to take their check. And, you know, it's just those funny stories like that about when you had very little, how did God take care of you? And that's the story he wants to paint on your heart, mostly for your faith building. And it's great. It's a fun journey.
Well, that's a lot of terrific advice.
Absolutely.
I feel like we're just taking in a lot of wisdom today. It's
Well,
good.
I don't know about that, but I just enjoy it. You know, when it comes down to the pursuit of the spouse, you know, for me, I played football. Dating was an issue. I had to kind of get my head together with that with the Lord. And I remember I stopped dating cold turkey for 2 years from 22 to 24. And I remember going to this church, and this pastor had a word for me. I'm going, okay, this is weird. I never experienced that. He goes, I believe God has your spouse picked out for you, and she's going to have a heart for the things of God. And I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, a false prophet. You know, because I was thinking, oh, who is this guy? I didn't know him, Jim Cobrae. Got to know him later. That was Wednesday night, and I had not dated for 2 years, and I didn't think much of it. I left the church going, that guy's crazy. And I'd be brought back to my school, my university. And Saturday night, I was at a wedding and met Jean 3 days later. And I went, oh, my goodness, I think that's the woman I'm going to marry. Wow. And she had the same feeling. And so isn't that amazing?
That's amazing.
So I think the point of that is really set your direction toward God and let him take care of the details. You know, I took his words very straightforwardly that God had selected your spouse. He wants to do that for each one of us, you know. And you just need to trust and keep your life in the right spot while he's doing those things for you, I think. Those are the blessings. Those are the stories that are so good, you know. So you don't have to strive, in my opinion, I think. You know, just pursue God. I had a friend who desperately wanted to be married and was kind of shooting beyond his region. And I mean, it's a sad story because he got married and they've had nothing but difficulty. And I think he was looking mostly at outward beauty. And I could see it 30 years ago. And now it's not going to happen. They're divorcing. And so aim for the right things, too. Character. That's important, most important.
Yeah, that's really great. Would you tell us, just as we wrap up here, where can our audience, where can they find all of your work, your radio show? Obviously, go to Focus on the Family, but and the episode that you'll be recording with Dr. Trueman.
Yeah, focusonthefamily.com is probably the easiest place to go. We've got so much content, though. I always tell the board we have content constipation. How about that thought? But you just go to the website and you can search it there. Your iPhone or your smartphone can do it as well. We have an app, which is the way to do it. Then you got access to all the library of content.
Yes. That's wonderful.
And if you really want to, you can join the Adventures in Odyssey Club.
Yes. All right. So for all our listeners, download the app, join the Adventures in Odyssey Club. Yes. Well, we're so grateful to have had you on today.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. And God bless you guys.
Thank you.
For more information on Liberty Mail or the Institute for Faith and Freedom, visit faithandfreedom.com.